welcome everyone to the EHH NextGen it's our first webinar. My name is Thomas Emmett. I'm the NextGen coordinator in Ireland, and I'm on the EHN board. And today our webinar is on difficult conversations and conflict resolution. This is, as I said, our first webinar. First NextGen webinar, and we're testing out different topics and kind of trying to untangle them. So yeah, the European Historic Houses NextGen is part of the European Historic Houses main body, and today at our webinar we have Erwin from Erwin Mediation and Kivanc Cubukcu, who is going to talk about non-violent conflict resolution. So first I'll hand over to Karen. Also, sorry, for questions, if you want to post questions, we'll have two speakers, and then we will have 15 minutes for Q&A. If you want to post questions into the chat box, please do. Or if you want to ask a question yourself when we get to the end of the presentations, just raise your hand and I'll come to you. But for now, I'll hand over to Karen.
Great. Good evening, everybody. You'll be pleased to know that I'm an hour earlier than you are, so I think that's maybe a bit of an advantage. So my name is Erwin, as Thomas said. I am a solicitor by profession, though I haven't practiced as such for many's a long year. I am a mediator, and I have my own company, Erwin Mediation Services. And I do mostly employment mediation, family mediation, but not separating couples, and commercial mediation and elder mediation. I was the president of the Mediators Institute of Ireland for 7 years, and I'm their standing trainer for their code of ethics and practice. So I am supposed to know a little bit about mediation, which is a good thing. So this webinar is about difficult conversations, but I thought it was useful for you to understand maybe the difference between difficult conversations that take place in a litigation scenario,
conflict resolutions,
and sorry, I can hear somebody coming through. So the difference between litigation, arbitration, and mediation. And to do that, the best way I can do it is to tell you the story of the orange. So John and Mary were in a room, and there was one orange. And with them was a judge, an arbitrator, and a mediator. And John and Mary were arguing about the orange. And John said he needed the orange, and Mary said that she needed the orange. And the judge said, well, hold on a minute. I've listened to you both, and I've decided that actually Mary should have the orange. Before Mary could take the orange, the arbitrator said, well, hold on a minute. I too have listened to the arguments, and I think it would be fairer if we divided the orange in two. And so we give half to John and half to Mary. And the mediator said, well, I would just like to find out a little bit more about why John and Mary need the orange. And so the mediator asked John, why do you need the orange? And John said, I have a recipe that requires the juice of one orange. And so I need the orange to carry out my recipe. Mediator says to Mary, so why do you need the orange? And Mary says, I need the orange because I need the zest of an orange. I need the zest of a whole orange. And that's why I need the orange. Mediator said, because of course, immediately the parties worked out precisely what the solution was. So that really is what mediators do. They listen to people, they try to drill down and understand the needs of the people, what exactly they want, what they need, why they want it, why they need it. And then the mediator can facilitate discussions, which are usually to do with solving problems. The mediator, knowing what the parties need and want, can then facilitate to come to a solution. So there are fundamental principles of mediation, and they are that, first of all, it's a voluntary process. So unlike arbitration or litigation, where you can be bound into a process and you can't get out, with mediation, it's voluntary and you can leave at any time. Indeed, so too can the mediator, but I actually never done that. But I often think maybe that might be a good test as to whether the mediator leaves using the voluntary clause. It's confidential, so there's no record anywhere. There's no court record of mediations. So really the only record is what the mediator themselves has and what the parties have. So there's no way which somebody on the outside can know what's happening in the mediation or even that it's taking place. Then there's also confidentiality within the mediation. So when the mediator is talking to one party, either before the mediation actually starts, anything that's said to the mediator in that conversation is confidential and held confidential by the mediator, so that that party can have the confidence of the mediator to know that they can tell the mediator things that the mediator will not repeat to the other party. And that happens, and I'll explain in a minute through the process, but that happens before the mediation starts and then during the mediation. And that internal confidentiality of the process enables negotiations to take place and enables solutions to be achieved. Another basic fundamental principle of mediation is it's the right of self-determination. So unlike judges or arbitrators, the mediator does not hand down a decision. The mediator doesn't say who's right or who's wrong. They do not act as a judge. And that's really important, because if parties think that you're going to act as a judge, they won't tell you everything. They will hold something back. But if you're not judging them, but you're facilitating them to come to an agreement, they're much more open than they would be. And the last fundamental principle is that the mediator acts with impartiality and with integrity. So the mediator is completely impartial to the parties and to the outcome. So it doesn't matter. The mediator doesn't get paid on a success rate, doesn't get paid if somebody wins or loses. Okay. In Ireland, the mediations are governed, first of all, by the professional body of mediators, the Mediators Institute. And mediations are governed under that by the Code of Ethics and Practice of the Mediators Institute. But in 2017, a Mediation Act came into place, and that has provided statutory safeguards for certain mediations in certain circumstances. But it enshrines the confidentiality, for example, and it protects the mediator and the process. So you might say, how does all this help with having difficult conversations? Well, first of all, what happens is that when you enter a mediation, the mediator will hold separate meetings with each of the parties. And the parties will then tell their stories to the mediator, explain the circumstances, explain what the issues are. So that when maybe a week or so later, after those individual pre-mediation meetings, maybe a week later, when you have the mediation itself, the mediator is apprised of what the parties actually want. Now, not the bottom line, and I always refuse to take the bottom line, because until you actually get into the negotiation phase, you don't want to know the bottom line, but at least you have a sense, you have an understanding as to what the parties actually want. One of the great joys of mediation is that its process is flexible. And although most cases run in a particular way, the process is very flexible. There aren't any time limits. You can take breaks, and it's much more holistic than, for example, with litigation or arbitration. You don't have, or you'd have to have, any papers. Most cases that I do, there are no position papers. I say that, but of course, I'm doing a mediation next week, a commercial mediation, and in fact, I do have position papers. But normally, I would go into the discussions, and whether it's a family situation or whether it's an employment situation, with no papers, because I actually want to hear what the parties have to say. I want to concentrate on them. And because I was a lawyer, if I get a piece of paper, automatically I revert to type and start trying to judge, well, who's right and who's wrong. So I prefer just to put the pencil down and listen to the parties. But it's a very holistic process, because you're trying, particularly with, and we'll talk now about family situations, you're talking about people who, as with you, you have a business. Now, it may be a heritage house, but it may also be a farm, there may be a shop, there may be all sorts of aspects, or different aspects to to your properties. So that translates usually into being a business. But what makes it more complex is that it's also a family business. So there are personal issues in there as well. And so what mediation tries to do is to work with the families to try and either retain or restore the family relationship. And I'm going to just go through a case which this is a real case that I was involved in, and it involved a business, and there were parents, the mother and father, and they were quite elderly, and they had three children, so the three siblings, and one of them, the daughter, was in the business. The other two siblings were there, but they weren't in the business. So the mediation was really between the parents on the one hand and the daughter on the other hand. And sometime in the past, the father had agreed to give shares to the daughter and had agreed management, like she was going to be a director and she was going to have certain management responsibilities. But when push came to shove, the father didn't follow through. So he never transferred the shares, never made her a director, and never allowed her management. And so what happened was a crisis. A crisis arose because the daughter was married, so the husband started to agitate. The daughter was so cross with the father that she stopped letting the children go to their grandparents. And this ended up in mediation. And it doesn't really matter what actually happened in the mediation. It was very complicated. It ended up there was going to be a buyout, and she was going to exit the business. But during the course of the mediation, she said to me, the daughter said to me, she said, look, before we finish this, what I would like to do is I would like to have a conversation with my parents. I want them to understand why I went down this route, why we came to this crisis. And I said, absolutely fine, that's not a problem. Would you want me to be there to provide a safe space, or do you want to do it privately? And she said she wanted to do it with me there as a safe space. And so I talked to the parents and I explained what the daughter wanted. The father kind of almost shrugged his shoulders, and the mother was delighted, absolutely delighted, you could tell. So anyway, we carried on with the mediation till we got a solution. We got a solution to the issues. An agreement was reached. And then I dismissed everybody else. They all went off home. And this was about 9 o'clock at night. And we went back into the main meeting room, and I sat at the head of the table, and the daughter sat on my right-hand side, directly opposite the parents. And she explained why she had to bring the mediation and what the issues and how they had arisen. And then the father answered, he responded and explained why he had done what he had done. And then the mother then explained. And that was really the end of that, to the point that eventually the daughter stood up and went round behind my seat and went to the mother. And they just hugged each other for nearly 5 minutes. And same thing then with the father. So you can bring about a transformative relationship like that. So originally, the father wanted the business matters to be solved, but the mother wanted to have her daughter back, and she wanted to have access to her grandchildren. So this element of the mediation was beyond important, and you will never get that in court proceedings. It just doesn't happen. So the benefit of mediation is that you can do that. So you can have both the business and the emotional element dealt with. So if I say there was hardly a dry eye in the house, there was hardly a dry eye in the house. And it was great. It really was terrific. And so using that example really for you and the positions that you find yourselves in, what I'm going to do is this is a made up, I promise you, this is a made up study. I haven't, borrowed anything from anybody. I've just made this up myself. So if it happens to relate to you, or you recognize some of the elements of it, well, that's fine. But I said, I have made it up. So I just want to explain to you how the process works, and then what might come out at the end of it. So this is a situation where you have a couple, John and Mary. They're parents. They're probably in their 60s. And John has worked the house and the land for many, many a long year. They have two children, Barry, the son, and and Anne, the daughter. And Barry is married to Claire, and they have grandchildren. And so Barry has been agitating, a bit like that last example, with John. He wants more to do with the management of the farm. He wants to try sustainability. He wants to try different crops on the farm. He wants to have a shareholding. He's growing out of his house, so he wants to know what's going to happen to the house. And if he's not agitating, wife Claire really is agitating, because she's had enough now. She's thinks it's time that they now had a much greater input into the house, into the farm, and that they got more out of it by way of management responsibility and also by way of income. And so Claire is getting to the point that she is going to stop their children seeing the grandparents. Okay. John is obviously concerned. He doesn't know what he would do if he didn't have the farm to run. He's nervous about Barry and sustainability and Barry's modern ideas. He's quite concerned, because what will he do? And if he gets out of the house, where will he live? This has been all his life. So what will he do? So he's really worried. Mary is very supportive of her husband, John, very supportive of him. But she realizes that, first of all, he's nervous about what's going to happen. But she too, of course, is nervous about what's going to happen, because if John dies, then what is she going to do? Is she going to stay in the house? Where's she going to live? Is there going to be a pension? And these conversations need to take place. But particularly, she's really concerned about losing her son, Barry, and losing the grandchildren and not being able to see them. Meanwhile, Anne is working in the city, but she's fed up working in the city, and she would like to come home, and she would like to get a plot on the land. And actually, she's got a bit of an idea that it would be good to have maybe a shop in the courtyard, and she would like to take over that and become much more involved in the business. So how do I know all of this? I know all of this because I've spoken to each of the parties, but not the daughter-in-law. I haven't spoken to Claire, and I obviously haven't spoken to the grandchildren. But whereas I spoke to John and Mary together, it's equally important that you speak to them separately, because in front of John, Mary will support John, and she might not necessarily say in front of him exactly what she wants and her concerns, and her concern about his health and her concern about finances. So even though you would tend to see both of them together, John and Mary, you also want to have put aside time to see them separately. And again, each of those conversations is confidential. So that process of seeing people individually, those will be called pre-mediation meetings. And they can take maybe, an hour and a quarter, maybe longer, it all depends. What you try to do is to keep people focused on the business of the house, the business of the farm, the business of the shop. You try to stay away from the row that will inevitably happen about who did what to who 20 years ago, 15 years ago, 10 years ago. So at the start of the mediation, you agree with all the parties that although those rows are very important, you're going to put them into what I call the parking lot. Because what we need to concentrate on in this mediation is the business, the house, the farm, and how the family is going to operate together. But of course, absolutely accept that there are other issues between the members of the family which may well have to be dealt with either later within the mediation today or on another occasion. And that's the beauty about mediation. So you could actually do it in bits, and you could sort out the business element first, and then, if necessary, you could then sort out the relationships, looking particularly at the previous relationships where people, as I say, are complaining about what happened 20 years ago and how somebody threw their toys out of the cot. So you try to focus the parties on the matters at hand. In those pre-mediation meetings, what you do is you have to not only listen to the parties, ask challenging questions so that they really have to think about what it is that they want, prepare them for saying what they want at the mediation, and then explaining to them, and this is difficult, that they're going to have to sign a legally binding agreement, which is an agreement to mediate. Now, mediators, sensible mediators, always had an agreement to mediate, but now, because of the act that I told you about, the statute, now you have to have a written agreement. And actually, that makes it much easier for working with families, because families, as a rule, don't want to be writing up agreements with each other which are legally binding. But because of the Act now in Ireland, it makes it much easier to approach the family and say, well, you're going to have to sign this. And it's a 4-page legal, my agreement to mediate is a 4-page, very legalistic agreement, which really follows what the Act has to say, because I don't want to paraphrase what the Act says. It's quite legalistic. But funnily enough, even though you think, well, families won't want to sign up for this, actually they do, and it provides parameters. It makes it much more of a business. It's much more of a business process than if we were all sitting around, just chewing the cud, which is an Irish expression, so I apologize for that. Where normally I would hold meetings, both pre-mediation meetings, but definitely the mediation itself will be in a hotel meeting room or another type of meeting room, but always on neutral territory, so that you always get away and you take people away from their home surroundings. And the first thing you do in the mediation is you will sign up, everybody will sign up the agreement to mediate. And then the mediator will probably have a brief chat with the parties, all of them together in the one room, mediator sitting at the head of the table, parties sitting around the table, all their papers if they have any. And the mediator will remind them that the process is voluntary, will remind them about the confidentiality, will remind them that the mediator is not a judge or an arbitrator and isn't making any decisions, and that the mediator is impartial. And then what happens is the party, whoever the mediator, decides is going to start, then starts. And probably in this case, I would start with John, the father. And I would ask him to have already prepared what he's going to say. He doesn't have to read it out precisely, but it's always better if people have a script, because this can be quite a stressful process. And if you have a script, then it means you can turn to it if you get stuck. And also the point about you telling your story and John telling his story, it will come to a point probably where he will become quite emotional and he actually may not be able to continue for a bit. His throat may kind of seize up, or he may cry, or so may Mary or Anne or Claire or Barry. So it can be quite emotional, and mediators have to learn to deal with that in the room. And if necessary, you can take a pause. You make sure there's plenty of water and things and coffee for people to relax. So I would normally get John to start. I would then ask Mary to say her piece. I then would turn to Barry, and then I would turn to Anne. And I would ask that each of the parties would stay quiet when the other person is talking. Not to be making copious notes, but just headline notes of what you disagree with. And what happens next? Well, as you can imagine, once we start getting into the disagreements, then the arguments can start. And that's absolutely fine. I mean, I have sat in mediations where people are shouting at each other across the table. And provided that that is going somewhere, I let it go. I let them at it. If it's becoming vicious and destructive, then I'll stop it. And we may take a pause, or I may just stop it. I may remind them of the ground rules that the parties will treat each other with respect. But in a way, I always take a view that if people are having a healthy exchange across the table, then there's energy in the dispute. There's energy there, they want to get it sorted. If they don't have the energy to have that cut and thrust, then maybe it's not so good. So I don't mind. So mediators get used to listening to terrible things being said across the table, and then moving on. Once that kind of phase has gone through and people have been saying, yes, I did, no, I didn't, you did this, I did that, then what the mediator does is start to break down into issues, into the topics. What do we need to talk about here? And there you find a flip chart is extremely useful, because you put up on the flip chart the sort of things that you would need to discuss. And I mean, I've just written down here, you'd want to discuss the ownership, what's happening about the ownership, what's happening about the management and control, what's happening about the day-to-day operations, how are the parties communicating now and in the future, what about phasing out of John's involvement, what would that look like, where will John and Mary live, what will John and Mary live off, what innovations do Barry and Anne want to bring in, and what about Anne getting a plot of land? Now, I've only listed those out. I said they're the very obvious ones, but there could be many more. And depending on the particular circumstances, there may be quite a number more. So you put those up in the flip chart. Now, I never put them up in chronological order, because then you're forced to deal with them, the top one first. So I scattered them around the flip chart, and then, having had the discussion with all of the parties and having listened to them around the table, I will pick the easiest one, the one which I think will be solvable most easily. And I will start with that. And we'll pick that as a topic. And let's say Anne's plot, let's assume that that's the easiest one, though frequently it won't be, because people don't like getting rid of land. But let's pretend that that's the easy one. We will start with Anne's plot. And we will then work through, where's the plot? What is it? How much is it? What's the access? Is there planning permission? Can it be got? And so you drill down into the minutiae about Anne's plot and what's going to be built there and who's going to pay for it. Okay, so that just gives you one example. And then you work through all of the other headings, and you hope the family come to agreements. And the rule is that nothing's agreed until everything is agreed. So even though you're beginning to chart, and I usually write the agreements down as I go, nothing is agreed till everything is agreed. So if everything falls on the last point, then it all falls apart. But usually what you try to do is, if you can pick off the easiest things first, then the family begins to realize that actually maybe there is a way through this. Maybe there is a solution. Maybe people have to go off and get more information about, the plot, the value of the plot, for example. So you can postpone the mediation. You can put it off for a week or 2 weeks while people go off and get more information. This can go on quite a long time. And if John and Mary, and I'm being a bit ageist here, but if John and Mary aren't really up to it, you might well decide to finish off at maybe 5 or 6 o'clock in the evening and then meet again on another day. And that's all down to the mediator to decide. But in the real life case that I told you about, where the couple were very elderly with the daughter, when I suggested in that case that we would actually stop at about 6, the mother said, absolutely not. This needs to be sorted today. We absolutely need to keep going with this until we get to the end of it. And so they had been up since early morning, and in fairness to them, they kept going. They kept going. So what happens at the end? Let's assume that the family are all agreed on all of the points, and we now have all of the information in. Then and obviously one of the things you will want for the family is they will want to be advised. They will need to be advised before they negotiate, but also as it's going to be a legally binding agreement, they will need to be advised before the final agreement is entered into. So you could have lawyers at the mediation. In a mediation like this, I would prefer not to have them in the first place. I would prefer that the parties went off and got legal advice, got tax advice, got financial advice, got pensions advice, got estate agency advice, and came to the mediation, preferably without lawyers, just themselves around the table. And then you would promise them that they would not be coming to a legally binding agreement until they had an opportunity to take the draft agreement to their lawyers to see if there were any other issues. So what I do then is I type up, because I write it so badly I can hardly read my own writing, and certainly nobody else can read it either. So I take it back, I type up what it says. I probably have got the parties to initial every page. So I take a scan of each page, I send that back to each of the parties with the typed up version so that they can check one against the other to make sure I've done it properly. And then you can again get them to involve their lawyers. Are there any issues here? Are there some things that maybe we need more advice on? Maybe there should be a trust set up. Maybe there should be a company set up. So there may be issues like that. So it mightn't all happen and finish in one day. But if you can, as the mediator, if you can work with the parties and even come to heads of agreement, and that will be called a memorandum of understanding, you have made, huge inroads. And one of the things which I mentioned to you about communication, you would try to agree with the family how they would communicate with each other in the future so that it wouldn't go back into a row situation. So you would try to build with them how they would communicate together in the future. And then you can put in a clause which says, if the parties, can't agree something, they can come back into mediation, or there could be a review meeting. So, as I said to you at the beginning, it's a very flexible process. And this can happen over one day, over weeks, over months, over years. Particularly important is if there is an issue with capacity. So if either John or Mary or both of them maybe are suffering from maybe early onset dementia or Alzheimer's, you may need to take that into account in relation to whether they can actually enter a contract or not. So there may be capacity issues that you as the mediator will have to deal with. So there's a whole lot of other issues around the side, but what I hope I've done in the short time available is to explain the process and how it works, and to give you one real live example, and then one example of what just could so easily happen, and how you can work together with the parties to help them to design their solution, because you're not imposing it. It's up to them to decide what to do. And so I hope at the end of this that it's maybe mediation means more to you now, and how it could be useful in discussions that you or your relations or your friends may have. So Thomas, I think that's me done.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Karen. And yeah, thank you. That was a very, very detailed, excellent overview of mediation. I'll go next to Kivanc. If you want to explain non-violent communication.
Sure, thanks. Just a quick time check. We have until 7:30, and I want to make sure we have time for questions. Is that it?
Yeah, I mean, you speak as long as you want. I mean, we can go slightly over 7:30.
Okay, I'll try to keep it. So yeah, glad to be here with you in your the first webinar of this hopefully a long series. I'm currently at a historic house in France, in Château du Fay, and my name is Cubukcu. I work as a facilitator, trainer, and mediator. My work is mostly informed by nonviolent communication, and I'll talk a bit about today on the mediation approach based on the nonviolent communications approach to mediation, and also hopefully give you a bit of from there some insights on how MVC can serve you in your day-to-day conversations and in the difficult conversations that you have. A quick question to you all: would you put in the chat if you have no or very little knowledge of nonviolent communication, a 0, 1 if you have somewhat you've been introduced, and 2 if you've been really you have been working with MVC. Let me see. Thomas say 0, Astrid 1. Thank you. All right, I'm seeing, I see a 3. That's awesome. Yeah, so I see some 0s, some 1s, and 1 3. So a range of information around MVC. So just a brief introduction about nonviolent communication. It's a communication and I'll say, in my experience, an awareness practice that's developed by Dr. Marshall Rosenberg in the 60s, who was a clinical psychologist. And the focus is really around creating a quality of connection that allows for natural giving and receiving to happen between people. And it has been used in many different settings, as well as in many conflicts around the world, whether it's for racial challenges, tribal violence, war, family challenges. So it's the MVC's mediation approach has been used in many different situations. So the focus that in a mediation for in an MVC informed approach is really focusing primarily on creating connection between all the parties. So it's really helping to connect each party with their needs and helping the other party to hear it. So as a mediator, I see my role as being a neutral presence that is at all times curious about what are the human needs behind what is being said and done. So, and while it might sound contradictory, but conflicts are in fact great opportunities for deepening connection, because behind all conflicts are really precious needs, though they might require a bit of work or decoding to really come to surface. But it's really those human needs that when they are heard by the different parties, allow for a connection that allows the solutions to arise. So really the objective, the focus, I will say, is on creating that connection. And I've been talking a bit about needs, and when I talk about needs from nonviolent communications perspective, it's universal. I'm talking about universal human needs like love and appreciation, choice, meaning, financial security, safety. So it's really universal needs that that are the life energy that is alive in each of us, and it really once connected with that allows us to see each other in a more with each other's humanity, and in fact ourselves as well. So many of us, I will include myself there, we have inner voices that can be judgmental and might be alienating ourselves from our own needs, and MVC is really a practice that's also supporting here. I don't have time to delve into the inner mediation that MVC can support with. I'll be focusing on outer mediation, meaning conflict between two parties. So one of the assumptions of MVC is that whatever we're doing in life is to meet one or more needs of these needs, and what we're doing, we call these strategies. So whatever we're doing, saying, me talking here, I'm trying to meet a bunch of needs for contribution, maybe for appreciation, for learning, and so when we talk about the conflicts, they happen at the strategies level. So another assumption of MVC is that needs never clash. So for example, if my partner comes and tells me, you're never home, I need you to spend more time at home with me. So that's what do you think? Is that a need expression or a strategy? There is the word need. I need you to spend more time. Yet, when I hear, if I can imagine my girlfriend telling me, "You're never home, I need you to spend more time at home," I'm immediately hearing potential accusation, and my body is taking me back. So the needs alive in that person might be maybe trust about relationship. It could be connection. It could be support. It could be love. I wouldn't, unless I express it with connected to the needs, or if it's expressed to me, I try to guess what's behind it. I wouldn't know what's really alive behind what's being expressed. And unfortunately, in most of us, we're not really trained in being connected with and expressing our needs, and also being able to hear the needs behind what other people are expressing to us. So most of the language that we use is not expressed in this need language, yet behind everything that is expressed, even it contains blame or judging or labeling, or said with strong emotions like anger. There are, I will say, beautiful human needs behind it. And in NVC, we call these kind of expressions the tragic expressions of unmet needs. So in MVC and during a mediation, what we try to do is to hear those needs behind what is being said, regardless of how it's being said and expressed. So the role of the mediator is one sort of a decoder or translator, so to speak, listening to what's being expressed and then translating them into the language of needs. Or one can say hunting the pearls, as one of my one of the MVC trainers I worked with used to say. And the way that it works in practice is that one person will start to, there will be first a pre-meeting individually with the parties, where there's an opportunity to for them to express themselves, and for the mediator to really have a first go at listening to and understanding the needs behind it, and also seeing where they are, how they are seeing the situation, what is their reality. And then during the mediation, the mediator is there to really hold the space and listen to the person expressing, translate them into needs guesses. So as somebody's expressing, I don't know what exactly which needs they are, but I can make guesses as a mediator. And even if the guesses are not on point, I will be getting feedback until I really connect with those needs. And then I will take those needs, once the first person is heard, take it to the second person, to the other party, and ask them to reflect what they have heard back to the first person. And this part is really a key part of the mediation, because as important as it is to identify those needs and for them to be expressed, it's also very important for it to be heard by the person that is expressing it. So once the other parties express the needs, then I'll go to the second part, second person, ask them to express themselves as a mediator, supporting them in identifying the needs, going back to the first person to reflect back the needs that they've heard, and then going through this loop as long as it is necessary until both parties are heard and all the pearls are uncovered. Of course, the loop, as I'm saying, doesn't go as smoothly. There will be, especially in conflicts, where typically mediation is asked for are conflicts that have been going on, that there's a lot of pain in both parties, and so there can be interruptions, blaming, shouting, sometimes blaming the mediator, sometimes both parties will tag team and blame the mediator. And there, the whole time as the mediator, my role is really to help do whatever is will serve the dialogue and will serve the connection. So as a mediator, I might gently interrupt. I might ask people to slow down, and at all times trying to really connect with the needs, so that that at the end of the process, all parties are heard. And once the needs are truly heard, Marshall Rosenberg used to say, like, it takes 20 minutes to resolve a conflict. So he was talking about once the needs are heard, it takes 20 minutes for the parties to come to a solution. And there, many times the parties do come up once the needs are heard with their solutions. And as a mediator, I support them in formulating these strategies and the requests that they make from each other into actionable, positive, time-bound agreements that can be referred later and adapted if necessary. And at times, there might also be certain potential strategies that come to me as a mediator that I would like to propose, but I mostly refrain from those, as when the solutions come from the parties themselves, and there's a much higher likelihood that they will stick by it. So yeah, I was I had shared with Thomas, asked Thomas for some examples of potential conflicts that might be happening in terms of generational shifts within historic households. It's not an area that I have done mediation per se. So one of the examples he told me was like a son wanting to open the house to the public, but the house has always been private, and the father disagreeing. So in such a scenario, for example, if the son was the first one to start, might sound something like, "Oh, Dad, you're so close-minded. I want to do something great here, and you're just rejecting it." Let's say something like that. So hearing something like that, when I try to orient myself towards what could be the needs that the son is expressing, it could be for contribution. He might want to contribute through innovating or wanting to contribute to the community. It could be financial security. There could be a need for generating more income. It could be connection or belonging. He might be wanting to have an opportunity to be able to connect with the community. So I would, as I listen to it, I would be making guesses and helping, trying to identify the need. And the father who doesn't want to open the house might be there might be a sense of belonging, being tied to the family's traditions, might be recognition that he might be valuing the respect and the recognition that comes from the upholding traditions. It could be harmony for the family. He might be thinking that he might be worried that opening the house to the public could lead to conflicts and tensions among the family member. Again, these are all these would be, as we progress as the mediator, hearing the parties express themselves, try to identify those needs. So I would like to leave you with a small sharing. I will share my. Can I? I'll take it over. Yeah, as I've been talking about the needs quite a bit, I wanted to share with you a list, and I will also send this through the chat for those of you who are interested. So I mean, there's much more. There's much more about. Sorry, I'm just trying to reconnect with Zoom. Okay. Much more about MVC that I'd be happy to share. But I guess if I would leave with one thing, is that next time you're in a difficult conversation or in a conflict, if you can maybe slow down and if you would like, open the needs list and try to see what are my needs and try to express from there, and trying to guess, regardless of how the other person is expressing themselves, what could be the needs behind the person, and making guesses as to what those needs are, and see if that can help in navigating some of the conversation. So I'll stop here to also make sure that we have time for questions.
Brilliant. Thank you, Kivanc. That was an excellent insight into nonviolent communication. Does anybody have any questions? If you want, put up click the raise your hand emoji or the thing that's down on the bottom of the screen. If anybody has any questions. Okay, Pilar.
Hello, Thomas. Very nice to see you. Thank you for organizing. It's been really interesting, both the contribution of Karen and Kivanc. I've been a facilitator myself, let's say, for creative problem solving in my company some time ago. I've never been a mediator, but it's true that when we were preparing the sessions, we had always like an agenda or a process that we were really following. And sometimes what was more difficult was really defining the problem to solve, because let's say in the heads of the people participating, they may see the things from their own perspective. So I would like to ask both Karen and Kivanc, in terms of the both, let's say, human needs, and also, let's say, the moment of truth of defining the blocks of problems or the problems to solve. What are the strategies they use? If there is, for example, in my experience, there is let's say, generating problems or generating an ideal scenario and see how to get there. So yeah, I would appreciate, because when things get, let's say, rotten or complicated, how you focus on, let's say, problem solving aspects. So let's say in the positive way of finding a solution. Thank you. I hope I was clear on the question.
Will I go first, Thomas? Okay. Interestingly, I've never had a situation where the parties didn't know what the issues were. I think sometimes they don't know what the solution is. So when I meet the parties in the pre-mediation meetings, I try to drill down with them what the issues are. And then, as Kivanc said, what the needs are. And that goes back, if you go back to that story about the orange, that, the need was they needed the orange for a recipe. And that was why they were holding the positions that they were holding. I will try and work with the parties to work out what the issues are, what they're trying to do. I don't like to get the parties to tell me the bottom line. So I don't want them to tell me the solution that they see, other than maybe in a general way. Some mediators do get the bottom line before the mediation. Personally, I don't, because an Irish expression, one story is good until the other story is told. So when parties come into you, they're usually almost 100% sure that what they have to say is right and is correct. And at the end of the pre-mediation meeting, I really need that party to be only 99% sure that they're right, because it's that wriggle room that will get to the settlement between the parties. If they tell me the bottom line, the solution at the pre-mediation, they won't have heard what the other party is going to say. So they're telling me their bottom line on the basis that they're 100% right. Now, what happens in the mediation itself when the parties are together is party A has to listen when party B tells their side of the story. And suddenly A's story doesn't sound quite so good. And party B could have pointed out some flaws in A's story, and maybe some legal issues where A is in fact not quite sure about winning. So if I've been told the bottom line on the basis that A is going to win, and suddenly A is not going to win because B has pointed out why not, A loses face with me by having to adjust their bottom line. And I don't actually want that to happen. So first of all, I don't take the bottom line or the solution at the pre-mediation. But what you want to do with the parties is to work with them, because they may not, even at the beginning of the mediation, or the day of the mediation, they may not yet have contemplated the solution that they will end up with. Because what happens frequently with the help of the mediator is that the parties will kind of work together possible solutions, and then they'll start to tweak them, and then they'll change them, and then they'll go into more detail. And I remember the very first case that I observed as part of my training. It was a commercial mediation, and party A was going to buy the shares of party B. And by 10 o'clock at night, party B was buying party A's shares. A complete turnaround. Because they had discussed it, they'd looked at it, they'd reviewed it, they'd looked at it up, down, round, and then they came to their agreement. So it's not to me that the parties don't know what the issues are, but I think they don't necessarily know what the solutions are. And that's the great joy of mediation. They can actually explore solutions, and much more than you would ever get in litigation. Because in litigation, you have to put in a specific claim. You put in a specific claim, and there's a specific response that the judge can give. Whereas with mediation, it's much more holistic. You can add in all sorts of things. And if we talk about heritage houses and all the different aspects that there are, you can actually build a really good all-round agreement where everybody wins. Everybody has an input into the solution. So that's, I hope I haven't gone on too long, but that's where I come from on that. I hope that answers it.
Thank you. Very clear.
And Kivanc?
So Pilar, if I understand your question well, and the way I heard it is like if there is a conflict on a topic, and then as you are exploring it, there are other topics that come up that are maybe unrelated. How do you how much do you allow for that? How much do you was that the question?
Yeah, it's more like strategies that you use in order to focus the discussion in terms of problem solving.
Yeah. So I guess it depends on where I'm in the process. So if it's in the stage of being heard, so identifying the needs, I allow for I try to follow what's alive that is being expressed. So I do allow for so to speak divergences. So if typically what will happen is somebody will express a need, and then once it gets back to it, then they will realize there are certain other needs underneath, and then certain other aspects that are related to it. So the focus is really there to ensure that the parties are heard. Once they are heard, and then we have the needs laid out, then I will they rarely kind of go in tangents in terms of problem solving, so they would rarely go to other topics at that stage. But if they do, I would remind them that here are the needs that we have identified, and here are the needs of party A and party B, kind of reminding them of that and bring them back onto the table in trying to find strategies to address those needs. So, because it's not really about I'm not trying to problem solve on the strategy. So if a client is coming to ask me whether the chateau to open up the chateau or not, it's not about the chateau. So I'm not trying to problem solve on the chateau. I'm really trying to get to what are the needs, and how can I help them find strategies that will support them in meeting those needs, which might involve opening or keeping the chateau private, or it might be something completely different.
Great, thank you. There's a question in the chat, which was, what can we do if the other party is not willing to bring in a mediator?
Yeah. So if it's
want
okay
to
for you,
answer
Cohen,
first?
yeah. I think that's the most difficult part of mediation, in my opinion, is to get the parties around the table. So I mean, first of all, unless there is a willingness from parties involved in the conflict to be around the table, that mediation wouldn't be it won't take place. So it will need to be a willingness from all parties. And I have in the past tried to, if before a mediation, trying to support the person wanting the mediation to understand, if I don't have a direct connection, to understand what is it that is blocking the person from going for asking for a mediation. And if I do get feedback on that, then I can try to address those concerns. But yeah, that is a challenging part of mediation process.
You know, usually in my cases, the parties have agreed to mediate before they start. So whoever contacts me first, I will be saying, and does the other party, have they agreed? And I explain that it's a voluntary process. More interesting is that when you get the parties into the mediation, and then one of them decides that they want to leave, and because the voluntary nature lasts from the very beginning to the very end, you know, if somebody says, I want to leave, and I'm leaving, and they storm out, you know, there's very, very little that you can do. I mean, what I tend to do is, if that happens, and where it can happen is in where you have business type mediations where the parties are negotiating a deal. And it can happen, and particularly late at night, that one of the parties becomes too greedy and raises the bar too high. And the other party just says, that's it, I'm out of here, I'm not doing it. So in those circumstances, what I do is I leave it for 2 or 3 days, and then I go back to them and I say, look, would it be worthwhile having another go? And most times they do, because people realize, you know, they get greedy, and then when they go home and they realize just how near they were to coming to an agreement, and they think, if only. So although theoretically the mediation is terminated, I ignore that and I pursue it. and just follow up. I actually had a case recently. It was an employment case. And one of the parties actually stormed out of the room because her husband had said something inappropriate, and he was there, supposed to be supporting her. And so she stormed out of the room, he behind her. And normally I would just let them go because that's just what I do. But on this occasion, I thought, no, I think I better go out and see if I can sort this out. Now, as it happened, no, she had made up her mind, and as she said with a great badge of honor, once I'd made up my mind, I never change it. And I thought, well, I'm not quite sure why you're in mediation anyway, but there we are. So sometimes it works to get them back in the room or to get the deal back on the table. And other times it doesn't. But most times coming into the mediation, I would try and ask, if there is a problem, I would try and ask to speak to the person who is doubtful, because I would want to explain to them myself what mediation is about. But actually, more interestingly, what I would want to do is to listen to them. Because sometimes when people are listened to, and then they realize that that's the way you behave, that that's how mediation works, that you're listening, then they might well come in. But I said, most times when I'm approached, both parties have already agreed.
Brilliant. Thank you both. We probably have time for one more question if anybody has any final questions. If you want to put up your hand, raise hand, or post it into the chat box. Yeah, Fons. You're on mute. Sorry, Fons, you're still on mute. Still muted. Okay. Do you want to post it into the chat box?
By the way, I'll post the needs list in the meantime for those of
perfect.
you interested.
Thanks for that, Kivanc. I took a photograph of it, so I'll have a look at it later. Yeah.
Great.
Always good to pick up free advice, you know.
The idea with these webinars is that we're confronting issues that people want to be talked about. So if anybody on here wants to suggest a topic for an upcoming one, please either you can send it on to me, or you can I'm in the EHH NextGen WhatsApp group, or get in contact with me through anyway. Sorry, Fon's just posted. We'll just get back to the question about how to get people allowing help from outside. Does that
with difficulty?
I've seen from close by that someone in the end just pushed a person in the family, and after 27 years, suddenly there is movement in the right direction.
Well, just answering for myself, I mean, if I get an opportunity, as I said a few minutes ago, to talk to the person, to explain the process. So I might sell that out as not a pre-mediation meeting, but an information session about mediation. So I will be going along to explain to the person what mediation is about. But actually what you do is you listen to what they have to say. So you almost run it as if it's a pre-mediation session. But it means you can certainly explain the process and allay any fears about the process. But as I said, at the end of the day, if somebody doesn't want to come in, that's it.
Yeah, it is a challenging, as Karen was saying, it's a voluntary process. So I haven't tried this, but I know I remember reading what Marshall Rosenberg did in one case was basically staying with the party that wanted to have the mediation and the other party didn't, and recorded the conversation of connecting with the needs and share that with the other party to give an illustration of how that kind of conversation would go. And in that case, that it helped bring the other party on the table, and then they were able to do it. I haven't tried it myself, but that's also
Brilliant. We'll wrap it up there. But thank you both. Thank you to both of you, to Karen and to Kivanc, for coming and joining this first of hopefully many European Historic House NextGen webinars. It's been recorded, so it can be sent out to members who weren't here. And other than that, I thank you very much and have a great evening.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a nice evening.